Shock and anger from parents of the Parkland school shooting victims over the jury's recommendation for life in prison instead of the death penalty for Nicholas Cruz.
Gina, my beautiful, kind, bubbly, bright daughter, deserved better than she got from the schools, and certainly from this jury.
This jury failed our families today. But I will tell you, the monster's going to go to prison, and in prison, I hope and pray he receives the kind of mercy from prisoners that he showed to my daughter and the 16 others.
The fact that he's going to go into some sort of general population, he's going to have to look over his shoulder every minute of the rest of his life.
The jury foreman said today some of the jurors felt it was the appropriate sentence. Under Florida law, the jurors must be unanimous on the death penalty for it to be imposed.
After the jury's verdict came down, many of the parents of these victims spoke, as you heard a moment ago, many of them angry at the recommendation. Governor DeSantis spoke today about it too and said Cruz deserved the death penalty. Our coverage begins tonight with Joy. And Joy, now the judge will confirm the life sentences in a couple weeks.
Mary Kent, that will make it official. This is not, as you said, what many of the Parkland families wanted. We heard from several of them who said they feel their children were failed by the jury today. Tears are shed, hands clasped tightly. Only a judge's voice cuts through the silence in a Florida courtroom as she reads aloud a jury's recommended sentences to Parkland school shooter Nicholas Cruz.
We, the jury, unanimously find that the aggravating factors that were proven beyond a reasonable doubt outweigh the mitigating circumstances established. No.
Cruz is now set to be formally sentenced November 1st for killing 14 students and 3 school staff members in a shooting rampage at Florida's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in February of 2018. Some victims' family members showed clear frustration as Cruz avoids a death sentence.
I pray that that animal suffers every day of his life in jail.
I sent my daughter to school and she was shot 8 times. I am so beyond disappointed and frustrated with this outcome. I do not understand. I just don't understand this.
I promise you, throughout this nation, there were people who had a more difficult time growing up than this shooter, who have been failed by the school system more than this shooter, and who have had less services provided than this shooter. And they did not choose to enter a school with a high-powered weapon and pull the trigger 139 individual times.
I'm stunned. I'm devastated. There are 17 victims that did not receive justice today. My daughter, you'll notice she was the 16th of the 17 to be read today. She was shot running down a hallway. Now, what mitigating factor was it that they used on her? Were they going to suggest that he didn't have the fine motor skill to shoot that gun as she was running down the hallway? I think anyone planning a shooting right now sees that there's a path to avoid the death penalty where it does exist. And the death penalty does exist, by the way. There was no reason they couldn't impose it.
The fact that he's going to go into some sort of general population, he's going to have to look over his shoulder every minute of the rest of his life. Just the way the fear in him, I hope he has the fear in him every second of his life, just the way he gave that fear to every one of our loved ones who he murdered or the students and people that he harmed. He should live in that fear, and he should be afraid every second of the day of his life. I never thought that I could be so ugly inside, but I wait and welcome the day that I get that call that tells me that that murderer was murdered in prison. And that's going to be a very happy day in my life.
Family members and survivors will have a chance to speak to the court when the judge issues the life sentences. The jury foreman says he feels badly for the families and that it hurt to watch the decisions being read in court. Ken?
Thank you, Joy. Some of the families said today that they felt some of the jurors lied about their views on the death penalty when they were chosen to sit on the jury. Loved ones say they can't understand why they didn't unanimously recommend it. Tarek is joining us now with a local trial attorney's perspective. Tarek?
You know, we spoke to Jay Plotkin. He's a former prosecutor who explained to us why some members of the jury could change their feelings on that punishment during the course of the penalty phase trial.
One of the more difficult juries to pick is what we call death qualifying jury, where, as you say, each juror, and there may be, in this case, there were hundreds of them, that are individually asked their views on the death penalty, and would they be able to weigh these aggravating and mitigating factors and decide, what is appropriate. And presumably, once you're on that jury, you've given the indication, or else you, in all likelihood, would not be on the jury, that you're able to do that. But after sitting through weeks of testimony, months of testimony, and listening to things on both sides, it's just natural that your personal views, your personal biases, despite your best efforts, are going to seep in there. And
Plotkin also told us that Nicholas Cruz's defense won this part of the case, and there's no reason for them to appeal. He said we can expect victim impact statements from the families during the judge's sentencing. And even though it won't affect the sentence, they'll be able to speak more freely about what Cruz did to their lives without the parameters and confines of a trial. Kent?
Thank you, Tarek. Now, you can read the interview with the Parkland jury foreman inside this story on news4jax.com. There are also statements from the children's families.